So I passed P Company in the summer of '83, and then stayed with the Parachute Regiment from there on in. Where exactly were you last night, and what exactly did you say? You Proctor, what's Bobby? He said, I've not had two generals, a brigadier and a colonel, ring me up before 8:30 in the morning. What exactly did you effing well say last night? Phil Batty, who's brilliant guy, one power Remy and then SAS, a fantastic guy. He looked up, had this big grin on his face, so I hinted crutches, walked in. He said, fine, that determined for the job, you got it. Now fuck off and go and get crutches before you fall over. He said, I saw you walk in with them.
Welcome to another episode of the Old Parachute podcast. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsors, Veterans for Veterans. If you left the military after 1987 and your hearing's taken a knock from your time in the services, click the link in this video. No win, no fee. See if you're eligible.
Hi, it's Colin Slowball here. I've got the opportunity to chat on the old Paratroopers podcast. It's basically, in a way, I'll be honest, it's promoting a book that I've got coming out in April, My Time with the Parachute Regiment, where I focus as a soldier and an officer, but actually by chance fell into setting up the Parachute Regiment Bobsleigh team. And it was brilliant because all we did was convert the ethos of the Parachute Regiment into the Bobsleigh team. Found we were really rather good at it. And as a result, there's 2 bronze medals with Sean Olsen and Dean Ward. And the guy's been dominating the Army team and the inter-services and even the British team since really 1991. And it's a great opportunity. Over 98 guys have been through the regiment, from the regiment through the bobsleighing, and it gives them a break and gives them something to look at. And it's something that when you look at the ethos, it's brilliant. So, I joined straight out of Sandhurst in '82. So no, I didn't go to the Falklands. Then got posted to One Power. It's pretty obvious why I went there. They'd taken on the Arctic role with a name like Snowball. I wasn't going to go to Cyprus, wasn't going to be going to Aldershot. It was the Arctic for Snowball. And then had just really lucky in the guys I had. My first company commander was a guy, Bob Llewellyn, fantastic guy. If ever you want to look at the principle of leadership, he exhibited every one of them. The COs we had was Ian McLeod, followed by Mike Jackson, and then we skipped John Brees and on to Dick Chugger. Brilliant. And the corporals I had, which actually were the ones who thought, I think most of them had the attitude is, we need to kind of guide the officers in the right way, because if they get to general, there could be payback time, because if we've created an arsehole, we're going to be the ones that suffer from it. So they were really good. I had people like Gaz Grant, Corporal Cryer, Tony Tony the Signaler, who was a brilliant guy, Blinky Blench, all sort of larger-than-life characters who actually did take the time, and Hubert, a young second lieutenant who really didn't know that much about it, but at least I was willing to learn. Hopefully that's good. And then had the chance to serve 1 power, 3 power. Funny enough, I always avoided 2 power, not sure, probably for my benefit or their benefit, not sure. Then depot power, RHQ, and brigade headquarters.
Well, welcome. There's a little bit longer intro
in
there, Colin, longer than the usual 30-second, but no, fair enough. Welcome on the podcast.
Thank you.
No dramas at all. No dramas at all. Well, what I like to do is a bit of a backtrack.
Right, okay.
We'll come on to the kind of bobsleighing and the Parachute Regiment, but I like to get a feel for the guests. Basically, kind of where they grew up, whereabouts in the country they're from, and what inspired them to kind of go down the route into the military. So, whereabouts you from?
Well, interesting enough, I was born in Sussex, then we moved to the Isle of Wight. I mean, interesting backstory. My father's first name was Henry, and he did have 6 wives. And he was born in 1922, so he's quite old school. And he had basically guidelines, which was basically, if you lie or steal, you're going to leather strap, because he had the old cutthroat razor. Anything else was negotiable. But he moved around a fair bit. We went from Sussex, where he was running the ground element of Gatwick Airport, down to the Isle of Wight, where he got into all sorts of weird and wonderful businesses, including running a Russian hydrofoil service up the River Thames in 1968, which, funny enough, got inaugurated by the Queen. You think, what the hell was he doing running Russian hydrofoils, taking politicians from Greenwich up to the House of Parliament in the height of the Cold War? And he used to drive back and forth to Moscow quite regularly, and we had a great collection of Russian dolls. And then he finished that. We got sent off to boarding school around about, I think I was 12, and he moved out to Nigeria. So he spent a fair time living, well, not living, he was living out there. We were going back and forth to school holidays. And actually, that's why I find it strange that when people try and criticize this country or question whether we're culturally racist, no, we've got a number of people who may be individually racist, but you try living as a white guy out in Nigeria, because the other thing that a lot of the politicians we did, he was working for quite a high-powered group, including the president, etc. So we lived in a little bubble in a Koi, the back end of the Koi country club, and we were pretty safe. When the occasional brother and I kind of disappeared into the other areas, you put your hand up for a cab. You're 50-50 whether they're going to stop and pick you up or try and run you over. So, I think people take this country at times for granted, but having lived around the world in different countries, we're pretty good here. I think we've got a great country.
We have the way that our country is, we have that privilege to criticize. I mean, you criticize living in certain countries around the world, you'll find yourself coming severely unstuck. So we do have that privilege. I don't think it is forgotten at times. I think the issue mainly is how it's kind of took a bit of a downturn over the last few years with the way that certain things are. But I try not to get too political because it's a minefield. But at which point in your kind of young life did you think, right, I'm going to go into the Parachute Regiment and I'm going to go in as an officer?
To be fair, I mean, at school I played a lot of sport, and basically, again, the sort of attitude was the school was focused more on sport, so I'm doing well at sport, not so great academically. Then I injured my back quite badly, so I had to knuckle down and do some work. And so, to my surprise, and most other people, I actually passed my A-levels, and initially went on to university to do law. Then I got there and thought, this is not what I want to do. We'd done I'm missing. I got kicked out the CCF. Because our CCF, it was at Seaford College, and all we had was a 1.5 mile long drive. And our idea of the OC's idea of CCF was us to march up and down the drive. And he'd stand there just shouting at us. He was a strange guy. He was one of our teachers. But he'd stand there shouting at us, and he'd lean back on this fencing. Now, unfortunately for him, normally the other side of the road was the one that was wired up to electric fencing. So anyway, a couple of us rewired his side. And what gave it away, I got a wee laugh before he hit the fence. So we then got kicked out, and they got made to go and do adventure training. Fun enough, building canoes, going off to Wales, walking all over Snowdonia. And I thought, actually, I don't want to be doing law. I want to be doing something like that. Then you read into it, and and I must admit, my father was in the Second World War. He sadly got blown apart in Antio, although he never talked about Antio. His only advice to me, because he had to come back from Nigeria to sign me in, because I went on a potential officer's course at 17 and a half, was make sure you join a regiment where you can get a skill when you leave. Qualification. He was in the engineers and signals. So he kind of, when I said joining the Parachute Regiment, said, which part of skill did you kind of understand? I said, well, you signed the form. Anyway, but because I dropped out of university, in those days you got a grant, so I had to pay the grant back. I thought, well, before I go anywhere near the army, I better show them that I can stick at something. So I did the potential officer's course at that time. The Royal Artillery one was supposed to be the best one up at Woolwich. So I then went in, and actually the Parachute Regiment that stage were going down the idea in 1982 that they were generally the officers were regarded as fit and thick. So they were going through a stage where they were only recruiting graduate officers. You had to be a degree. So there was a couple of us in non-grad. So we initially got rejected. So I then basically went a longer way round. I went, because I'd been playing sport and everything else, the logistics course said, you can come and join up, go get commissioned there, because the Parachute Regiment rejected me because I didn't have a degree. So I then went and played rugby for the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. And then when Fire Brigade were being reset up, they then needed all the logistics, all the sport arms to go through P Company and pass. So I then said, I want to do an infantry secondment to the Parachute Regiment, which they signed me over for, and then never went back. So I passed P Company in the summer of '83, and then stayed with the Parachute Regiment from there on in.
Wow.
And what was interesting, when I did do P Company, the only people who passed were the non-grads.
Really?
Yeah. And I went through with Jamie Chiswell and a couple of others. But the non-grads were the ones who passed. The grads didn't. So they were then started to get short of officers because they weren't passing P Company, because his idea was we want to change the image for being fit and thick. We needed to be thinkers. But at that stage, not so many of them were passing.
Yeah, how about that? That's unusual, that really. So yeah, it's thick and fit, as you say. So it kind of no, fair play. I mean, yeah, going through Sandhurst and stuff is supposed to be quite sort of challenging. It's like the officers equivalent to depot, isn't it? It's hard. You get beasted. It's tough. It teaches you different probably skills, but on the same level as going through depot para.
To be honest, it was a mind-numbingness of it, actually, because on the one hand, I mean, what I found really strange, on the first day, it's January the 6th, 1982, you had the Academy Sergeant Major, and it was snow all over the ground. And this is what I found staggering. When we were supposed to be developing leaders, his line was, right, if I can put your name to your face, it generally means you're in trouble. So my advice is keep your head down and get through this place. Then he said, because it was snow all over the ground, one pace forward, the man with a stupid name. And I thought, and it didn't get any better from there. You know, I mean, it was, we went through, because we had individual rooms, so you didn't have that quite such a tightness. But we had, I mean, basics of, we had, for every foreign student, they pay for about 7 of us. Now, we had a Kuwaiti guy who told the colour sergeant that if he got through, he was going to give him his Rolex watch and a Mercedes. So our colour sergeant was rather keen. So he worked out who were supposedly the fittest guys, and our role was to make sure we carried this bloke through. Now, unfortunately, we were heading for Sovereign's platoon at the time, and there was a gun barrel race. And the rules were that if somebody was marginally injured, they would count. If he was badly injured and couldn't carry on, he didn't count. So if you're walking wounded, you counted the time. Now, we admittedly did start trying to strap him to the gun and drag him around, and they said, you're not allowed to do that. And unfortunately, he did fall in front of the gun and got badly injured. So we won that competition and won overall Sovereign platoon, but the colour sergeant didn't get his car or the Mercedes. And I spent virtually most of my time after that on RPs. In fact, when I got my rugby colours for playing, for the academy rugby, I was still on RPs getting those. It was good saving, good saving program, but I didn't get out of Sandhurst that much.
No, fair one. Restriction of privileges. Yeah, it's never good. Never good at restriction of privileges,
especially 6 months worth.
No. I've had a couple of weeks of restriction of privileges or getting in a disagreement with a young lieutenant when I was in the Parachute Regiment. That's a whole other story. But yeah, so obviously you've gone through Sandhurst. Which battalion did you go to? One para initially, then?
Yeah, I got, but yeah, exactly, straight in, because they've just moved down from Edinburgh. Were taking over the AMFL role for the Arctic. Was brilliant, and I think Simon Barry or whoever was doing manning and records saw, right, one para go to the Arctic, snowballed, that's where he's going. So I got posted at one para, and it was the best 3 years because doing the Arctic training. I mean, some of the corporals I think found it hard because they're that age where you had young Toms who took to skiing a lot quicker than them, and they had to really knuckle down and ski and still take command. But we basically blew the previous unit away because Ian McLeod made sure that all the companies could ski, and we did it absolutely superbly. But when we're doing live firing, you imagine you're going downhill, skiing downhill with a bunch of novices, live firing with guys firing the GPMG from the hip. I mean, whatever the GPMG guy, you always made sure you were behind him. It was realistic, and it was. I mean, that I would say you had to be good soldiering. Your admin had to spot on just to survive, let alone do the fighting of it.
Well, that was way before the health and safety stuff that in the world we live in now, as we talked about. Yeah. But the training, the realistic training of firing into a bunker position as someone's grenading, the opposite side that closer. It's like it made it good. That's what made you good. So you trained real, and but like I say, it was kind of close call, wasn't it? A lot of it, like you say, make sure you're behind the GPMG gunner when you're on skis.
Well, sadly, we had Danny Lydon was actually killed. I just handed over. He was a platoon sergeant to 2 platoon, which I was 2 platoon A company, and he sadly was killed. But he was just sheer fluke. One mortar round went out, and a small shrapnel piece went straight through his heart. Tony Baldwin, who was my signaller, brilliant guy, he went off up to Hereford, but he was badly injured because he got most of the shrapnel from it. But it was just a freak accident. But and that's where they then had the bloody small school corps, whoever came in, had a field day with one para, because virtually most of the other rules were being bent, whatever. But they had no bearing on, sadly, what happened to Danny Lyden.
Yeah, well, you're always going to get them kind of accidents.
Yeah.
Where, yeah, like I say, you train real enough that
Yeah.
unfortunately these things happen, and then they happen in warfare as well. We've seen it. The kind of it happens, and it's a reality of the training and the conflicts that we were involved in.
But what was so silly was one para really took. I mean, they were really well held in high regard by the rest of the NATO element, because the guys went in there. They had our ski team was beating the previous unit because they went out early, and they just were so professional about it. And they, one para really respected. And you got this stupid arms plot that, instead of doing what the Marines do, allow one para to take on the Arctic role. So you could have had the Arctic in the 5 airborne gun, the Arctic, the jungle, and the desert, as your commandos go. They always rotated it, and it meant that every unit could have a go every 140 years. So you're not going to have another go. So why not give it to one unit that's going to do it properly? And in fact, Mike Jackson, one of our officers' education, was put up a case as to why one para should keep that, or rather 5 airborne brigade should keep the Arctic role. And you think, at that point, the 5 airborne brigade was out of area, so it's pretty obvious we should have kept it.
Yeah, there was a period of time, wasn't it? And I think it was it 3 para in the end that had the Arctic role? I'm sure it was.
They were down in Shorncliffe. Yeah, they had another go at it. But I don't think they had the same resources. I mean, it was madness. We even had our patrols platoon had civeters. And you heard Andy Mason, who's the patrol commander, he modelled himself from Oddball out of Kelly's Heroes. I mean, they were brilliant. I mean, that platoon were just brilliant fun. I mean, all we saw them as a mobile T-urn, but that platoon, when you're Oddball, idiot, Mason, again, it was those larger than life characters of all the people in. And I can look at every battalion I served in. There was always those larger than life characters, all different ranks, that you just cracked up laughing the whole time. They were just brilliant guys.
Yeah, absolutely. It does develop some characters, doesn't it? And whether they be the fighting men, the hard nuts, or the or the clusterfucks as well, you get them as well. That there's just a drama wherever they go.
Well, my first platoon, 2 platoon, we were together for 2 years. They were phenomenal. We were either won the march and shoot or came second to the patrols platoon. But because they were together, some of them were nightmare in barracks, but my Christ, were they brilliant soldiers in the field. And that's a sort of match, you had great guys who just got knuckled down, did the work, and enjoyed it. That's the other thing. I don't think any of them moaned about anything. Other than the fact, it piss wet through or whatever, but it was no sort of, surliness. It was, they always reveled in the fact it's really wet, sir, isn't it? And that was, the harder it was, the more they reveled, really.
Yeah, and there's something you said there about you were together 2 years. Now, I've said this before. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know if things have changed, but this was my argument with the Royal Marines. Now, I have a lot of respect for Royal Marines, banter aside, but they move round their kind of roles quite a lot. Now, like the same as what you've said, when I was in my 11th Platoon D Company, I was in 11th Platoon D Company for 7 years. And for a lot of us, we were together. We had the same platoon for about 3 years. And it was phenomenal because we knew how we all operated. When we were doing section attacks, it was fluid. It was incredible because of that. You knew each other. You knew each other on a personal level. You lived with each other. You worked, and that creates that bond. And a lot of other units tend to rotate through. I could be wrong, but I get the impression that a lot of other units, but that bond is a thing that makes you a good soldier, in my opinion.
It becomes instinctive. The same that you look at the way the All Blacks play rugby. They don't have to look over the shoulder to pass. They know someone's going to be there. Yeah. In the same way, you got that level where the guys, when you go through SOPs on orders, you can say SOPs because the guy knows them because you've rehearsed them and practiced them the whole time. And everyone does watch it back. And even if there's 1 or 2 guys that perhaps aren't the most popular, you've still got that mutual respect. Some of the guys just may not go out for a beer with them. Yeah. But they're good at their job. That's what matters.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So moving on then, obviously you've done the Arctic, you've come back. Did you stay with 1 para after the Arctic, or did you move battalion?
I went down to depot.
Yeah, you went to depot. How long were you at depot?
I did the tour, but that's when I set up the Bobsleigh team. And in all fairness, I mean, it's one of those. It was Mike O'Neill was the edge, but because we were never allowed the DS, you were never allowed to go to Bryce when they're doing the jumps course because they were worried we might take them out doing fitness. Mike O'Neill's attitude is right. You better find yourself something to do for 4 weeks, or I will send you to Wales to run ranges. and because they were always sort of running ranges. So I just happened to be going through our guides and saw that the Sabin Prosper had come in and sponsoring the Army Bobsleigh Association, and they said they couldn't just believe the Royal Tank Regiment and the Cavalry were the only ones in the British Army that could bobsleigh. So they opened up and said we want a novice bobsleigh competition. I spied it. So I saw John Noakes crash on Blue Peter. Sounds like a good idea. So I put in for it. And then Edward Gardner, who was a regimental colonel, the guy who set up the Red Devils, said, okay, it went through Tony Stook, who's company commander, and said, well, you can go, but you need to take 2 people from each battalion. Let's have a team. So I then, and this is what's so funny. They then, I then had to write, requested to go on standing orders. Anyone interested in going bobsleigh, contact Lieutenant Snowball at Tabo Para. So half the time, thought it was a piss take, didn't they? So someone could be called Snowball going bobsleigh. So the first year we had a bit of trouble getting recruiting people in because they thought it's got to be a. It's
Never volunteer for anything in the military either,
But we got them in, and we actually what I then did was look to say, okay, what's a standard we got to meet? Because I tracked down the British Bobsleigh Association standard. So everyone that went out for this novice all had to meet those athletic standards. And what I didn't realise, because Edward Garner was brilliant, he thought, we said, well, we're going to need a bit of sponsorship. Now, Colorado was sponsoring the Red Devils at the time, and a chap called Bill Doby was heading up the Red Devils. He got invited to a mess dinner night, so Edward Gardner could get him a bit pissed and get him to hand over 5K for the bobsleigh team, which he happily did. And then because of the Arctic, we discovered Gore-Tex, and everyone's buying this. So you think back to the 80s, certainly 83, 84, 85, we were all buying our own kit because they weren't issuing the Gore-Tex, they hadn't even bought it in. So we discovered with one pair, we were in Bulford, you had Cirencester about an hour up the road with the Cotswold camping. So I think it was Andy Goff discovered them. So we were going there buying massive amounts of Gore-Tex, all bought through Andy Goff, and we all kitted out. So I then said, right, we need Gore-Tex. We're going to go out and do the bobsleigh. And what I didn't realise at that point was just the impact it has, because we were the only team, there were 8 of us, but there were other units had teams. We were the only team that turned up as a team with the same kit, with Barrett badges on it. And the impact it had on the other ones, we'd almost won before we started, because they just basically psyched themselves out, because we'd looked like a team. The guys were all fit and capable of passing the test. So the colonels that were running it turned around and looked at us. And they obviously clearly weren't fans of the Parachute Regiment, because as they were giving the brief at the beginning, if anyone goes downtown, gets pissed and has a punch up, then he just looked straight across at us. You lot, you'll be for the high jump. Now, what we did was, I think we annoyed him even more, because out of 22 sleds, so 44 guys, we came first, second, third, and fifth. So he had to hand all the medals over to us. I think he'd have been sending us back than actually having to give us all the kit, because we wiped the floor with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we got given the kit in bits. I'd never seen a bobsleigh before. There was Dick Smedley, myself, brilliant guy, Joe, called Marsden. There's a story with him later on. But we looked at it. I went for the red one. I thought it looked like a Ferrari. Then we were kind of putting the bolts together. We got bored, so we discovered we got out the old gaffer tape. Sort of stuck that together. We thought this is a good idea. And there were 4 of us having to share each sled. Now, as we were going down, each of us crashed. Now, 50-50 other people were getting down. And I remember going across to the colonel in charge saying, look, I'm not being funny here, but everyone else seems to be 50-50 getting down. All 4 of us are all crashing, but we're all crashing on the same corner, which is the only right-hand corner. Could there be anything wrong with the kit? To which he said, if you can't hack it, go home. And unfortunately, a sergeant major, brilliant guy called Corey Brown, he overheard him, came across and he stuck his head in. He said, oops, sorry, your kid's steering's not connected on the right-hand side. We didn't have a chance of hell. But what we got, as I was coming down for my next go, they were filming the BFBS or whatever it's called, the film crew. And I was standing there waiting for the guy in front, and the person there, Marshall was on, was telling the cameraman who was coming down. And he was announcing me, and all I heard this voice come back, said, no, just tell us when the Paras are coming, because they crashed so much better than everyone else. Because when our guys crashed, they laughed about it. Because, if you bounce off the side of a Herc, it doesn't hurt that much when you crash a bobsleigh. So the guys in all about perspective, but the guys just enjoyed it. They just dusted themselves down, went back up, get it right the next time. And my attitude was that because the cavalry seemed to be selecting their drivers on rank, so the officers drove and the other ranks pushed. Whereas my line was saying, don't think rank defines who can drive a bobsleigh, because we had a couple of guys who drove motorbikes. I thought, well, you've got to be good if you're driving one of those things around. So I insisted everyone at least had one go at driving. They said, why? I said, well, we might discover you're good. And if we discover you're bad, you're not going to be a backseat driver. You'll shut up and just get on with it. So, the logic, and we just, by the end of the week, we pick the drivers on merit, i.e. those who got down, and then just wipe the floor. And it was just fantastic. But the mentality of the guys, they didn't put a foot wrong all week. At the end, at least we had something to celebrate. And then by that time, we were jumping in the van and going home. So whatever atrocities they may have done were left behind. But they're just a brilliant, because we had nothing, no real sponsorship or anything else. So you made do, and the guys just focus on winning. And the harder the other guys were making it, the more determined our guys were to succeed. And that's where.
Well, it is if you've got nothing to lose and you kind of been thrown as the underdogs and nothing to prove, then it kind of takes the pressure off as well, doesn't it?
Well, the next thing we went up to St. Moritz for our next competition. Now, Parachutes in St. Moritz, great day. I mean, we're driving out. And I still remember we get about 5 miles from the border, about half. We were driving about 12 hours for Christ's sake. I can't remember who it was. Suddenly said, "Oh shit, I left my passport behind." And we literally said, "Well, we're not going back for it." So all we did was just shoved all the luggage over it. We thought it's 2:00 in the morning. I bet you the border guards aren't going to be that interested. So we drove in, lobbed all the bags over it, but we got through. Next voice pokes up. Well, how am I going to get out? We said, no one's going to want to hold on to you, are they? So we just got on with it. And then we got into the hotel, and they said that we had to have proper, bobsleigh start shoes. Now, in Winsburg, we've been allowed to use the running spikes, and we all conjured up a pair of those. The proper bobsleigh shoes, brand new, £100 a pair. We had about total, after we paid the hotel bill, 120 Swiss francs left. So there's a really nice Swiss driver. He said, look, I got about 6 to 8 pairs. I can sell you second hand, for 100 Swiss francs. So we went down, a couple of blokes saying, well, what size are they? I said, I hate to say this. Reality is, if they're too big, put more socks on. If they're too small, you take your socks off, because that's a luxury we can't afford. They're going to fit one way or the other. But we were saying this hotel, and this is where we got our first next big sponsorship. Gubble Marder, maybe I shouldn't put his name in for this bit, but he either got lucky with a barmaid, or he, being 3-power, had his own stockings, suspenders and kit bath that he took with him. Because for breakfast, we're in a 3-star hotel, Baron, great hotel. We're sitting there having breakfast. There's a really nice, big burly chap, a stockbroker, I didn't realise he was the head of a big stockbroking firm. He's sitting there quietly with a big Superman jersey on. In comes Mars and his bar stocking suspenders, and he just heard his voice sort of talking. He said, that's got to be the most revolting sight I think I've seen in years. To which I look and see Marsden. He's got a hairy chap, so white mask and all the kit did not look enticing at all. So I turned around and jokingly said to this stockbroker, I said, well, come on, you can hardly talk. You're about as much like Superman as Humpty Dumpty. So he said, that's right, I come all the way to Summer to get abused. Who the hell are you lot? I'm coming and joining you for breakfast. And we just hit it off. He just loved the guys, the way they took the piss out of each other and everyone else. What I didn't realise, he was there doing the Crescent Run, which is the old aristocrat sort of, where the +4s and going down like the skeleton, but on a traditional, really, brilliant old track and great heritage. He was across the road watching it. Then he was used to come back across and watch us. And I think he either heard somebody say, God, how are we going to get rid of the paras? They're good, but they're not, socially acceptable type thing. Anyway, he watched us all week, and he came at the end of it. When we'd done well, we come about second or third on that one, because it was the open army competition to head all the big boys there. And he came up at the end, he said, Colin, what's your objective? I said, well, to be fair, it's 87. We're not going to make the 88 games. We're going to go for the 92 Olympics. So he said, okay, so what do you need? I said, well, we either need 1 brand new bobsleigh or 2 one-year-old ones. He said, no, give me a figure. What's the minimum bottom line you need to get started? I said, well, actually, 6 grand. So he'd had a few. So he got a beer mat, just wrote, I owe you 6K, gave me his business card, and he said, when you get back to England, give me a call. And I kind of laughed, thinking, you're pissed, you're not going to, just... He said, no, where's my bond? And he did said it in Latin. It's much better. Anyway, by the time I got back to depot, because I went on to the inter-services, he'd rung 2 or 3 times to find out where I was. And he honoured it. He came through, gave us the 6 grand. And that was, although it was a huge amount, but in 87, it's not a small amount, but it was exactly the right amount of money we needed to be able to buy our own bobsleigh. So we weren't reliant on the army giving us their crap.
Wow.
And that enabled us to be that bit more independent. And that's when we started going from strength to strength. And then you just got more determined, and the belief that actually we are getting good at this. I reckon we can make the Olympics. And then we formed 50% of the British team. And all the time, we weren't given full-time training. So we'd do, say, 2 weeks away in the competition, come back. And like 1 year, we won the British Championship. Or to be fair, Sean and his crew did. While everyone else was going off to the piss, we were packing up the kit, driving back to the UK because we were jumping into Scotland on the Monday. And that was a great leveler. And the reason why I think the team was popular with the regiment is because, in my last tour, when you have Matt Hellier, and he was out in Dungannon, I was there with C Company, we had Coal Island. And he joked, he used to see this idiot, because they switched the summer and winter. So you had the 92 winter, which was also summer. Then they decided to break it up. So you had the 94 winter, and then you had 96 summer. So they split it. So we only had 2 years to get ready. So I was out back on doing the Ireland tour in Dungannon, and we were shared base, and we were really co-lining in that area. But you used to see at 11 o'clock at night this idiot doing sprint training up down the heading pad because you do your day's work, fit it in. And actually, I think it made us better at both soldiering but also bobsleigh because you didn't have the luxury time and it reminded you the only reason I was bobsleighing was because I was in the Parachute Regiment. I didn't join the army to be a bobslayer. I joined the army to be a soldiering, and the bobsleigh just became the side issue. And then we got rather good at it, so we then just rotated it through. But it was a brilliant way. I mean, you were wired to win. You think you'd come back, go parachuting. At the end of it, you then pack up and go off bobsleighing. You were buzzing. Yeah, it was just brilliant.
Yeah, I bet as well. And obviously, Winter Olympics are usually in really nice places, albeit a bit cold, but they're usually in really, really nice locations, brilliant scenery. So what a thing to get into. And it's always said, if you're good at sports in the military, then, you spend your time having a great time, don't you?
Yeah. Well, you certainly, I mean, but then when we picked up Gore-Tex sponsorship, because we came in and it was, I mean, we got it in 91 coming up to the Olympics. And, both Sean and I were on the world circuit, and Sean was a better starter. We were probably similar ability at driving, but he was better at the start. So a 10 to the top is worth 3 at the bottom. So we loaded Sean's team up because he had a better chance of winning, getting to Olympic qualifying, because we set the regiment team up with the aim of getting parachutists to the Olympics, not getting me or any one individual. So Sean was starting faster, so he got the fastest crew and he delivered the goods. But we picked up Gore-Tex, who gave us $250,000 for a sponsorship, and then and that was then it was slightly different because we expanded the crew, the team. And we were running 3 4-mans, and we were funded to run 2, but we thought, right, we'll have 2 competitive, and we'll always have the third one so guys in the regiment who just wanted to come and experience it, they didn't have to take it seriously, could at least have a go. So that way you got them talking about bobsleighing, and it became more worthwhile. The regiment got behind it because more people were participating. But at the time, the BBA, the British Bobsleigh Association, which was a limited liability company, they were 80 grand in debt. And we just got 250K. Now, the BBA, British Bobsleigh Association, they were predominantly all Royal Tank Regiment generals, brigadiers, and colonels. And they had Cholmondeley Messer, who was the chairman of Save and Prosper. In those days, if you were a director of a limited liability company that went bankrupt, you got barred for being director for 7 years. So he can afford to be part of this company. So then this general, Tony Walker from the RTR, I got invited up to go and see him in the office, to speak to him. I thought I was going to have to explain what I was going to do with the Parachute Regiment's money to develop our team. And I thought, actually, none of your business. You got independent sponsorship. What it was, he then invited me to become the BBA's finance director. And I said, well, with all due respect, sir, and this is probably not going to go down too well, do I have mug written my forehead? He said, I said, well, we've got 250K from Gore-Tex. I know you're 80,000 in debt. And you think, I guess, by making me the finance director, you being a general, me being a captain, you're going to tell me what to do with the 250K to offset your debt. Well, that's not happening. To which I got invited to leave his office. so that one, then they tried it again and I'd forgotten that because it was a limited liability company, all the athletes also got a vote. So we were 50% of the British team. And, I hopefully in your time, it's sports volunteer. So rank didn't come into it when the regiment played sport.
Yeah.
So I said to the guys, look, this is what we're going up to do. These are the accounts of the BBA. This is where they are. This is what we're going to do. Now, you vote however you think, because they're going to try and vote the chairman off because he wants to save his skin because he doesn't want to go down with it. But it's voluntary. You just do what you want. But we are going in blazers and ties. Now, we went up there, and unfortunately, we got early. It was set up like a boardroom. So we got there early. We filled all one side. And then when it came to voting this guy off, because they wanted to say, if he couldn't resign, but he could get voted off the board, which meant he'd be okay. So I thought, hang on, you got us into the mess, you can get us out. So I put my hand up to vote, and the other guys just take the piss, all put their hands up immediately as if I had some sort of block vote, and I made him do it. So we voted him back on, which didn't go down too well. Then you had the Robin Dixon, who was the last guy to win an Olympic gold medal in 1964. He was actually para guardsman and SAS. So he suddenly pipes up. I can remember back in 1962 when I was a very arrogant young para captain thinking I knew best. I went, I wonder who that said that. He said, but in 1962, I decided I'd leave the British Bobsleigh Association, go off and do my own thing. And I didn't come back till 1972. So like a little schoolboy, I put my hand up and said, sir, can I just ask you one question? He said, what's that? I said, you said you'd turn your back on the BBA in 1962. He said, yes. And you didn't come back until 1972. He said, yeah. I said, but was it in 1964 you won your gold medal? He went, well, yeah. I said, so did you any harm, did it? So that went down like a lead balloon. Then I actually went through the accounts. Now, I'd put two of us on the world circuit for £29,000 for 8 guys doing about eight competitions. The board, of which there were 4, fun enough, senior officers, they'd spent 65,000 going to Cortina, La Plan, Cervinia, and San Moritz, all the top ski resorts in Europe. They spent £65,000 on 4 of them going to these resorts. So I asked them, would they like to explain why they spent 65k on 4 of them, and I could get 8 for the whole circuit and 29. Well, they didn't explain, but I didn't think anything more of it. Anyway, the following morning, I'm happily walking out the mess, and Sergeant Caldwell said, sir, just got a call from the regimental colonel. Thank God it was crikey, McGregor. And he basically turned around and said, Colonel says, get your ass into his office now, but you're getting a cup of coffee. And I walked in to see Hamish McGregor, and he had his head in his hand. He said, where exactly were you last night, and what exactly did you say? No, your pardon, sir. What's probably said? I've not had 2 generals, a brigadier and a colonel, bring me up before 8:30 in the morning. What exactly did you effing well say last night? So I explained it, and he said, right, well, you're not going to get posted to diplomatic corps, but I can understand his sentiment. What you need is top cover. So you're having lunch with General Gray. And General Gray was just brilliant because he understood it. He said, look, you know something? He said, he kind of slightly reminded me a bit like I was when I was a young captain. I thought I could change the world, and you were passionate and thought you were going to drive it forward. Then you discovered you need rank. He said, trouble is, to get the rank, you've got to play the game. And if you play the game long enough, the danger is you then perhaps become part of the problem of what you wanted to change. So you kind of woken me up. So I've only got 6 months left. Fuck 'em. What do you want me to do? And he just brilliant. And he backed that. And I didn't realise how, because he never let on that he really had my back. It was only when I'd left doing the redundancy that I saw the letters he wrote to try and get my redundancy overturned. You realise that actually, he said he knew me for 4 years and really complimentary. And I thought, that is a real compliment. That a general, let's be honest, as a captain, most of the generals don't really know you anyway. But for him to say, I've known him for 4 years, and he basically said he's the sort of officer we all aspire to be. I thought, shit, that means something from someone like that. And I'm glad I didn't get the idea that he was backing me, because you probably would have thought, because who was it? David Parker read in one confidential I had. Colin's a bit of a regimental character and he gets away with far more than he should. I went, why would you tell me that? You give me all those carte blanche to carry on, but he put up with a lot. And I think they knew that my focus or my heart was making sure the blokes had a good time. It wasn't about me getting out of it what I could. And it was, what made it was just the blokes, because when they applied themselves, no one could touch them. It was just brilliant.
Yeah, that's usually the case with the blokes, isn't it? And again,
Yeah.
if you get, we've always said it, we talked about leadership before, and if you're a good leader and you get the most out of the blokes, if you're a poor leader, you won't get anything out of them. That's just, and so how many leaders still get that wrong? It's across the board, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a question of when they're looking at their career. I mean, John Reith, I remember him saying, stay away from soldiers, they get you into trouble. So he focused on going up the staff route, but actually he missed out so much because one part had Ian McLeod, who's brilliant. He always, when we did the long tabs up in Macrohannes, he'd always turn up, 1 o'clock in the morning when your head's down, you're knackered. He'd be there marching past and leading by example. Then we had Mike Jackson, and I know I saw. I think you did a pod with someone else that everyone's always got a story about their times with Mike Jackson.
Adrian Freerwood, that many.
Yeah. But I mean, the only time I've ever been in a strip joint and physically thrown out of one with Mike Jackson, because we were over in 84, 83, 84 with 101st, and just a company exchange. We went up to Kentucky, and then Mike Jackson, being the CEO, he came out to see how we're getting on. Anyway, there's a brilliant guy, Ian Moore, phenomenal platoon commander. He was point platoon on Mount Longdon with 3-power. Then he got posted down to 1-power. But he was just, the blokes loved him. Big 6-foot, solid Australian rower, number 8, and boxer. But Jackson decided that he was going to take the subalterns out on the town. Fine, who's going to turn that one down? So after the first couple of points, we had to remove the car keys off him. And we drive around because he's a staff guy. Then we decided we're going this strip joint. And admittedly in Kentucky, wasn't going to be a top-end strip joint. So Ian and I chatting away, and we said, where the fuck's the colonel gone? And then we heard him. He got loose. He was on stage offering the stripper $30 to keep her clothes on. And the bouncers took umbrage. The next thing is we're being hurtled out the doors, all 3 of us, kicked out because Jackson was trying to pay a stripper not to strip. What the fuck? But he was just the battalion loved him. Then he handed over to John Reese, and that's a different story. Then we got Dick Trigger come back in. I don't know if you ever came across Dick Trigger. But his opening lines of the mess was, because he was a big into motorbikes, was, I may ride a motorbike, wear leather trousers, listen to rock and roll, but I'm not a yobber, nor will any of you be. But he was just, again, one of these guys that led by example, and he always had blokes' backs. He was put them first, as did Mike Jackson. And 1-power just got so lucky. And I say my opening few years of the regiment, you must have got all the best officers, all the best, Ivan Pringle as a company sergeant major, he was an absolute brilliant. But as a company sergeant major, as a real character, you think that's what a sergeant major should be. When there's time to be disciplined, you get your head ripped off. And then the RSM was Paul Copson. And I don't know if you ever played combat squash.
No.
But Paul's idea was, if you're going to the ball and he thinks you're going to beat you, he'll just punch you in the head. And you got on there, you think, hang on, how many times am I going to get punched in the head by this guy? But he just took it. He was just, again, one of those characters, larger-than-life characters, you thought it was perfectly normal. So that's how the Parachute Regiment played squash.
Yeah, different times again, though. Different times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Malcolm Kluker stitched up some poor young Tom who just arrived, because Copson played hooker for the headquarter company. We were 1-power. Malcolm Kluker told our young hooker, right, when you get down, you got to make sure the opposite number knows you're there. So this poor Tom punched the RSM straight in the head, and all he saw was his scrum come up, and Copson said, "What's your name, son?" He said, "I'm the RSM. You know you're in trouble now." You saw this poor Tom wilting, thinking, "Fuck, I've just punched the RSM in the head. I'm in trouble now."
Ouch.
Ouch. But no, if you look back, I just remember all the characters, and yeah, we had some difficult times, but don't we all? But the people around you made it so good. And again, to achieve what we did with the bobsleigh team, and over 98 guys for the regiment have all been through the bobsleigh team. And annoyingly, we should have had 3 guys in the Olympics that just finished.
Yeah,
you got Nick Gleeson and Ollie Butterworth and Callum Dixon all up in the running. And again, it's not sour grapes, because Nick, I've never met someone actually so humble and so talented and has taken so much crap from stupid people and still come up smiling. Because, he was hands down, should have been at the Olympics, but it's just petty, silly selection that he didn't go. But he's not missed a beat. He just got his head down and said, I'll prove him. I'll prove what I need to prove. And the last race, he won the World Cup, not World Cup, he won the European Cup race in St. Moritz, and they still didn't select him. Which is silly. And sadly, I don't know if you saw the result of the bobsleighing in the Olympics. The guy who was saying the best ever British brakeman came 13th in the 2-man, predictably, and 7th in the 4-man. And with all 5 million all behind him, they've got a lot to answer for because they were claiming injury. Nick actually was still the fastest brakeman on merit, and they didn't take it, even though he's coming through as a phenomenal driver. And you get the wrong people running like the BBA. But then again, going back to my time, for some reason they always got. Well, to be fair, actually, the generals were good because they had status, so they could get things done. But then after I came back as a director in 2007, they had a whole load of average gnomes in there that just didn't do anything, and the athletes were doing all the work, and you had these people sitting back. And now you've got, really, you wouldn't notice any of them running it. And they've got some really talented athletes. And to be fair to the guy who didn't do badly at this Olympics, if he'd have been managed properly, he'd have probably done really well because he's a very good driver. But he's just allowed to be run on his ego as opposed to run for the benefit of the team.
Well, I like everything. We could go on all day about the politics and how they get in the way, and if your face fits and someone likes someone else, and unfortunately that happens in all walks of life, and it's a real shitter that some people miss out on really, really great opportunities and doing really, really well just because on the opinion and the basis of someone in charge that shouldn't be. But that's the way of the world, and
I think where we were quite lucky, where they really did, and stick rigidly to P Company. Everyone got in there having passed on merit, because most of the time P Company was. Very rarely do they deviate at all. And that's where I think the regiment was so good, because everyone started off with mutual respect. And it was up to you then to either maintain it or do you behave like an idiot and lose it. But everyone had that mutual respect to start with. So you'd all gone through the same selection. So there was that element of respect that everyone said, actually, you've earned your place here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So moving on from your military career, so you spent 15 years in the military, and would you leave as a captain then?
Yeah, well, I did sort of acting major, but then substantive captain. And then because of the bobsleigh, to be fair, I one of these people that hit lucky, I suppose, because one of the last sponsors we had was Vauxhall with General Motors. And we kind of had to extend their sponsorship because they gave us a Vauxhall Monterey, which we got all sorted out. We thought we'd apply for the green card on the Friday, and unfortunately one of the guys wrote it off on the Sunday. And the insurance claimed we didn't have the green card. So Vauxhall said, looks like you were going to have our logos on there for a few more years.
Right.
But they were good about it. I mean, it wasn't the guy's fault. It was just one of those unfortunate things. But then they basically, Vauxhall was part of General Motors. General Motors had a division for Hughes Training, and they were just signed over a global training contract for Hughes to do all the training for GM. So I was applied for a job at Hughes, and because obviously people from Vauxhall knew me, so probably must have said, okay, he's okay, he's a good guy. And so I picked up a job with Hughes, part of General Motors, running their training. So I started off in Vauxhall as a basic training coordinator. And the one thing the Army didn't prepare you for, and this is, I don't know, it may be different nowadays, but in the Army, you never have to negotiate your salary, do you? And in actual fact, you never have to write your CV because you generally get promoted on your confidentials. So those two things were new. So when I sat in the room, I worked out, as a captain, I was on probably 25, 27K a year. And not huge, but then again, your 3-bedroom married quarter, you're paying 120 quid a month for, compared to what you pay if you're in Surrey, being a lot more. So it kind of equaled it out. So when they said to me, right, we're prepared to offer you 350 quid. And I thought, okay, 350 quid a week, that's after that. Is okay, I've got to accept the fact I'm a civvy now and haven't got, much going on. When they said 350 quid a day, I thought, thank God I kept my mouth shut for a day. What are you paying me that amount for? I'm doing bugger all compared to what I'm doing before. And you almost felt guilty about being paid that sort of money because you had nowhere near the responsibility or anything else. In actual fact, you almost felt bad because you weren't doing a great deal and getting paid far more than you were in the Army. And you weirdly felt a bit guilty because I learned, but for the company, I was very good at negotiating for the company. I always found it hard putting a price tag on what you think you're worth yourself. And I think that's one area that I don't know, it's any better now, but perhaps when you left, that they do teach you when you go into negotiate for your salary, bloody well learn how to do it. I mean, I was just sheer lucky that they decided that they were going to pay that. That was a going rate. So I didn't talk myself out of it, but, but fine. But then I got, because of the attitude from the Army, in our days, it was you paid 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and, and 7 days, and leaves the privilege. You kind of just got on, and whenever they kept giving you work, you just got it done. Because I just left the Army, which is pretty secure. you're out now. You're thinking, right, I've got a young family. I need to make sure I do well at this job. So I picked that job up, moved to Germany doing a change management program, and then ended up in Dubai for 7 years running the training for the Middle East, for GEM for the Middle East.
Wow. I mean,
And
you touched on a few things there that, like the weird shift in money and how it's
yeah,
distributed wrong. Firefighters, soldiers, police
exactly.
officers are paid pittance and have
Yeah,
got a lot of responsibility where they're held
yeah,
accountable for their mistakes, as we've
yeah,
seen countless times. And
yeah,
yet you can go out and, in your own words there, working for a company where you don't feel like you're doing that much, but you're
yeah.
on stupid money. It's all wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the most ridiculous one during just after COVID, or when the nurses and junior doctors going on strike, and they were they were pushing up. Maybe they were on average getting paid what 50K a year thereabouts. If they're lucky, 30 to 50. You had the two numpties on. I mean, I was doing it, so I was looking after my mother. She had terminal cancer. She used to insist on watching that Helios program this morning when you had Holly Willoughby and Phil Schofield. Now they were debating whether they thought the junior doctors and nurses should get paid the extra whatever to take them up to 50K. Those two muppets were on 800,000 a year for reading Autocue. You thought, and you've got the gall to question whether these guys should be paid a half decent wage. And if you two weren't on TV, no one miss you. You don't have enough firefighters, bloody nurses and doctors. All of a sudden, society comes to a standstill. I mean, I'm no socialist, but think, who would I rather have in a pub with me? Numpty, Schofield and Holly Willoughby, or guys who are prepared to put other people before themselves? You think, from a firefighter, they're the most, in a way, they're prepared, or you guys are prepared to run into a burning building to save people we don't even know. And you remember that spate when idiots were calling out the fire brigade so they could throw things at them?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you think, what are you thinking? That's where they should bring back serious prison sentences, because you've got these guys who are prepared to run into burning buildings to save people they don't know. And you've got these muppets who are prepared to throw things at them. And that's it's a weird society as we've got into.
Yeah, it's weird, and you get a lot of criticism being a firefighter because you sleep on nights. And I always say, it's what what firefighters are prepared to
Prepared
do,
to do. Yeah.
all for £38,500 a year, which is
Yeah.
in the current. This is well below the kind of
Yeah.
standard of living and stuff like that. But that's a whole other argument. But yeah, the shift of wealth,
Yeah.
it will never change.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, the firefighters are the same as an insurance policy, isn't it? You've got them, but you hope you never have to use them.
Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah.
what it should be. And yet, for some reason, everyone wants efficiency and saying, right, can we, like when they shut down in London, didn't they shut down the whole of the fire stations and then worked out, actually, the traffic's a bit heavy. They may not be able to get to these places in time.
Yeah.
You've got to have redundancy in for emergency services. It's basic common sense.
Yeah, well, what a lot of people do, and the press wrongly. I mean, some of the time, and part of it is about pay, but a lot of it is always about cutbacks. But that bit gets forgot. So we want to serve the public and give them the service that they deserve. Your council tax goes up every year.
Yeah.
And that's for firefighters, for policing, but they get cut every year. So you're actually paying more and getting less for your money.
Yeah.
And it becomes a point where it becomes dangerous. You can drive past a busy fire station. My old station's a massive station. At night time, there's 4 firefighters in that station to serve a whole massive town. And I mean, a population of, X amount of thousands of people. If there's 2 big incidents at that time,
That's it.
it's it. And it's happened many, many times through that hot summer. We've had far too many incidents where we were calling in services and other fire services from 3 counties away that were taking an hour and a half to get to jobs. It's just not right,
No.
But again, that's the way of the world, and we're not going to change it. We're not going to reinvent the wheel, are we? We're not going to change anything.
Well, I think there's that saying, isn't it? Evil only flourishes when good men do nothing.
True.
And maybe it's a time that, the politicians are the ones, and it's not where their focus is, how do you cut things down because we want to save money, but they don't look at the contingency planning, saying, okay, it's like, you think back to any appreciation you did in the army, it was brilliant. You look at your planning factors, so what? What's the impact? So what they don't seem to do is when they cut back on the fire station, don't say, so what? Can we still get to those fires within the same time frame? They're not asking those questions. They're not building in that redundancy or building that contingency. They're just trying to cut it as lean as they can to save money in the short term and not worry about the impact it has long term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is. And it's just, it can, I've stopped kind of not raising sort of my issues around it, but I just realized that nothing's going to change in the immediate. You know, we can swap governments, but they're all the same. They're all out for themselves, and unfortunately, that's the way it goes. So moving on anyway with you, Chris, you're from General Motors. And kind of stuff like that. You then set up your own company doing sort of team building, leadership stuff. Is that right? In the Middle East, in Dubai?
That's in Dubai. Well, basically, the one thing that GM were good at, they basically was a change management program. It's all about behaviors. So everyone is those hideous phrases, but they are true. You talk the talk and walk the talk. So a lot of people will say, yes, I do all of these things, but then actually when their natural behavior comes out, they don't. So GM they got a company called Sassin. It was one of the other divisions, but they went into all the experiential learning so that they could show people what you actually do when you're under a bit of pressure. So they'll say, no, I'm a good manager. Then you say, okay, well, let's put you high ropes course, put you under a bit of pressure and see how you respond when do you put yourself first or do you consider other people? So we built this experiential learning site, and it was new to the Middle East, Dubai. So while I was running for GM, we had part of my job with Hughes was to do new business development as well. So we got companies like Emirates Airlines, BP, and other companies all coming in wanting to do this for their own leadership development. So when I left GM for some reason took no interest in the site because we built it for the change management program. So I was able to take on the site at no cost with a hotel. So then I got all the big companies coming through that. And then, I mean, what was really sanguine, you had Sheikh Mohammed was running a future leaders program, and they wanted to look at developing the top future leaders for Dubai. And they'd done a survey, and they wrote to me and said, rang me and said, look, we've done a survey. You came out number 1 for leadership and number 2 for team building. Would you like to put in a proposal to take on this? They wanted us to run a 2-day assessment center to cut down 60 people to 3, and then a year-long leadership development, doing other various things to develop these future leaders. He said, yeah. So I put the submission in, and they came back and said, you're slightly more expensive than everyone else. I said, well, you did say I was number 1. So they said, would you like to come in and see who we are? Because I didn't really know what the executive office were. Then you realise it was Sheikh Mohammed's commercial office. So it was a brilliant opportunity to do. And then, I mean, the first program we had was we had one of Sheikh Mohammed's sons to go through the assessment centre. I think, okay, so one who's going to fail him. But to be fair, he was superb because he'd been through Santos, he'd done time in the military, so he knew about the command task, everything else. But then they promoted about a month after, he finished this assessment, being selected on the course. They then made him chairman of Dubai Bank. We think, well, he's 25. Who's going to tell him when he's making a mistake? He's a ruler's son, and he's a chairman. So we said, what you need is to bring in a whole load of mentors from all the top Fortune 100 companies in Dubai who don't have, flesh in the game, so they can tell these people and show them how to act as leaders because they're not part of the government department. So we got all the MDs of BP, Shell, Ford, all volunteered to take on a 1 or 2 of these guys to mentor them. HP were the ones who were honest about it. Said, right, provided I can select which department they come from. I said, why is that? He said, because we want to do business for certain department. So we'll mentor them because we persuaded to buy products when they head up their departments. And it was, it was a great program. But what was interesting, there was one morning I was up in the office waiting for a meeting. These 3, and the women in Dubai were brilliant. They were far more motivated and driven than a lot of the guys that I came across on this Future Leaders program. And these 3 ladies had come in and they'd started what they called their super sports car club, because they were from very wealthy families and working for this ruler's office was a privilege. What it was, so they'd all go out and buy ridiculous cars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and they obviously watched Top Gear, I think, and they'd do their own tests of the cars. And the only rule was whoever got the speeding fine had to own up and pay it. And they were comparing notes as to obviously who got the most that week. And they were just hilarious. And I went back and said, you've got to let the ladies come on this project, because the first program we run were all men. So the second one, we said, you've got to get the ladies on this because they're really driven. So they agreed, and we got 40% were ladies. And then when it came to the end of the assessment and start of it, out of the top 10, the top 8 were all women. And one of the guys said, there's no way we can say that. I said, you need to, because if you don't, I will, because you can't fudge the results. They earned those places. And at the end of the year, when Sheikh Mohammed was handing out all the prizes, he stood up, for a ruler in the Middle East, saying, I see the future Dubai's with the ladies. And he was promoted him, and he's absolutely superb. I mean, he described himself as a benign dictator, but Dubai is commercial, and he knows they didn't have much oil. They've got to get oil. Well, their oil was running out. They got to make it commercial. So it's how do we make money, and how do you get the right people in the right jobs? So I mean, he went through Sheikh Mohammed went through Santos as well. In fact, a lot of the Middle East, sort of rulers have, but he was good. So I did that job, and then I got divorced. So that's when I went and started working for Aegis to pay the maternity the alimony.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, I was going to say how you came onto that, because I mean, it sounds like you were doing some really, really good stuff, some really sort of rewarding work, and obviously, I assume well paid work. How come? Was that the main reason for going into the middle, or was there a bit of excitement there as well? Because again,
no,
I
to be
talk
honest,
about it quite a lot, that we still seek risk way into, because of the time in the military and stuff.
Well, GM was well paying, but selling my own company, you had to front it. I mean, I had two investors in it, and then basically towards the end, I mean, I basically sold that company to Che Blythe, because he came out, and it's funny because they were looking at part of the team building. They want to expand, they get more people doing team building. They were talking about doing sailing. Then all of a sudden, this meeting I was in, they came up with the idea of doing dinghy racing. I went, well, I'm no sailor, but a dinghy is only two people in a dinghy. You're not going to get much team building in that. They said, well, what do you suggest? I said, well, get hold of someone like Che Blythe. He runs a BT Global Challenge, the world's toughest yacht race. They said, well, how do you do that? I said, well, I guess I'd chuck him down and ring him, which is what I did. And Che was one of these old school guys, really brilliant. That he had a lovely PA. If she was busy on the phone, he'd pick it up and answer himself. Now, Che, going way back, he took one of my parcel parades at Depot, and he was a strange character. He was, blue, because he and Ridgway did the road across the Atlantic and entered two blocks named after him. They're the first person to sail around the world the wrong way. So I rang him up and said, there's a possibility of would you be interested to come out to Dubai, look at bringing the BT Global Challenge in, or at least getting some of the yachts out here to teach team building. And being a Scotsman, I perhaps shouldn't say this, he said, I'll come provided it doesn't cost me any money. I went, okay. And unfortunately for him, one of my key clients was Emirates, so he got a first-class free ticket from Emirates to out to Dubai. The other one was a brilliant guy called Gerald Lawless, who ran Jumeirah International, which owned the Burj Al Arab. So dear old Jay got flown out free to Dubai and put up in the Burj Al Arab 7-star for free. And he sort of think, what the hell is this all about? And then he sort of, at the end of it, he could see that we got him some good contacts, and they were looking at sponsoring the BT Global Challenge as well. But at that point, it was a BP Global Challenge. And he said, okay, would you want to come and work for me? And I said, well, actually, Che, I've got two investors in the company. If you buy them out and buy the company, then I will come work for you. I said, but I'm not going to dump them. They trusted me and invested in the company. I said, and let's be honest, if I was prepared to do that to them, you probably only wonder how long it would be before I might do it to you. So to be fair, he bought out the investors of the company, took over the company. And then we sort of ran it. And then basically with a divorce, I sort of headed back to the UK. And that's when I picked up working for Aegis.
Yeah. Did you know Tim Spicer as well then? I take it.
No, I knew obviously Simon Barry, and to be fair, it was Milos Stankovic who linked me up, because he knew Tim Spicer, and I was at a bit of a loose end, and Tim said, Milos said, well, I'll give you an intro to Aegis, linked up with Spicer, who handed over to Simon Barry, and then the good thing is, with people because a lot of people regarded Aegis as just 5 parrots, didn't they? Which is an extension, they recruited 70 parrots, and they could always vet who it was, because someone would always know you. So I don't think any Walter Mitty's got in there, because people vetted each other. They said, yeah, okay, good guy. Then Andy Goff was there as a training guy.
I know Andy,
out in Baghdad. So I went out there and then got sent up to Crete. In fact, I arrived the day when Aegis were in trouble for the shooting out the back of the out of Suburban into Crete.
Ah, okay. So what year was this then? 2006?
That was 2005, 2006, just the year they were doing the elections.
Yeah.
Because we were there doing the DoD reconstruction, and Simon Barry was heading up the bit that was providing all the support for those elections. So I only did about 6 months then, and then left, then picked up a job with Hart. And then part of the reason why I didn't go into that in the first place is once you get into it, it's quite difficult to get it back out of it.
Because it pays good money.
Well,
the rotations are really good. And I get where you come from. So I went anti-piracy about 2010 after several years on the circuit, and then
Oh, right.
so I was out with Shield, a South Korean company.
Oh, right, okay. Because
Uh,
I ended up with Mast.
oh yeah,
But that was brilliant. I mean, Phil Batty and Phil Cable, really great guys. They set the company up. They were one of the first in, and they had a couple of super yachts and then expanded. But I've been sort of having to. I mean, part of the other reason why I left doing the ages stuff because I needed both knees were buggered. They were dislocating, and because I was only 42, they kept deferring them because they said you're too young. We don't want to do them yet. And if you're in agony every day, it makes you a bit of a miserable git to be around. So I eventually persuaded. Well, I actually had to go to Gerald House and say, this is ridiculous. I keep getting pushed back for this. In fact, they did a second round of keyhole surgery so they could bump me off the waiting list for the knee replacements. So, because they said, so too young. So 2011, I went up and got hold of Gerald House, the local MP in Aldershot, and said, this is madness. You've got to, I've got to get these knees done. Because the GP would say, well, why don't you go for a disability pension? I said, because if I get disability pension, I'm going to find it even harder to get a job. If you replace the knees, I will be able to get a job. So this GP actually wrote on this letter that because Gerald Howard made her write to him explaining what's going on. She actually wrote that Mr. Snowball seems to think because he served in the military, he should get some sort of preferential treatment. I said, I don't want preferential treatment. I just want some treatment, like new knees. So eventually, I haggled the surgeon, guy called Mr. Chisel, brilliant guy, and I basically got him to do both at the same time. I said, surely I'm going to save you money, buy one get one free option. You got to get them done. And I was paranoid if you got two different surgeons, they may not line them up. And secondly, I couldn't afford a year off because they normally say 6 months for each knee. So I got them both done at the same time. He eventually caved in. He said, well, I think you're fit enough and stupid enough that we'll do them together. So got them done. And then I literally 2 weeks after I'd had the surgery, and just literally 2 days after the staples all come out, because you have to wait 2 weeks to get the staples out, I got an interview with Mast. And so I drove up and sort of, I still had the crutches. I thought, no one's going to employ me if I'm walking on bloody crutches. Certainly it's not doing that sort of job. So I thought I was being clever. So I parked up in the car park, sort of hopped into the building thinking no one'd seen me. Got up into the waiting and hid the crutches underneath the chair. And then when I sort of walked in to meet Phil Batty, who's a brilliant guy, ex-one power Remy and then SAS, a fantastic guy. He looked up, had this big grin on his face. So I hid the crutches, walked in. He said, fine, if you're that determined for the job, you got it. Now fuck off and go get crutches before you fall over. He said, I saw you walk in with them. Sod off and get them before you fall over. And it was, you were that determined. You just wanted to get a job and get back into it. Yeah. And that was a real privilege because he then got moved out to Malta, lived out there for 4 years, supporting them. And, they were two really good guys. But unfortunately, as you're probably aware, basically it was a race to the bottom with all the rates and everyone was, trying to undercut everyone. And it just wasn't a good place to be. I thought towards the end, I got out.
Yeah, well, there was the employment of the local nationals because they could pay them a considerable amount. So it went from teams of expats to towards the end, I was a team leader and I ended up as the only English speaker with a team of Sri Lankan Navy guys, which again, no disrespect to them, but they're not the same standard as the ex-British Army or we had a lot of Foreign Legion guys with us. They're actually really, really good. But it kind of went down that route. They get saturated. The CP world got saturated.
Plus the fact they had no way of vetting them. They're like the Sri Lankans. I mean, we started bringing Indian guys, and you had no way of being able to vet and check that they were who they say they were, and they had done what. Whereas obviously, Mars started off Paris Marines and SAS only because you could always vet them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like everything, sadly, it does get saturated and the standards tend to drop, the money tends to drop. And I was always lucky, probably a bit like yourself. Once I started to notice them decline, I moved on. Something else. And I was lucky enough at the end of this sort of anti-piracy, that's when I got into the fire service in 2013. So what did you do when you finished the sort of anti-piracy and the security stuff? What did you kind of move on to from there on?
Well, actually, I mean, you then spent some time. In fact, I was due to go back out to Somalia with Olive, but then I went and visited her, and it's changed because not being speaking ill of the dead, but my mother was wife number two. She only lasted 4 years, and I was 18 months when they got divorced, so I really didn't know her that well. The only time you usually have to go and see her at school holidays, and unfortunately, she wasn't the easiest person to say the least, but. I popped down to visit her between looking at going on a job, but then she wasn't in a good way. I mean, she was unfortunately a raging alcoholic, not a particularly pleasant alcoholic either. You get happy junks and you get thoroughly miserable junks. But there were a few people kind of hanging around her that quite happily wanting to spend her what they thought. Well, the trouble is, my brother has actually done very well for himself, and both of us would rather give her money than actually give her time. Sounds bad, but I mean, when I helping her go through her finances, when I was the last few years I was in the army, because she only used to ring us up when she wanted money. So I noticed on her bank account, I set up a standing order so I could give her the money without having to have the phone call. And so my brother was the same. But when you saw the sort of people that were hanging around, I thought no one deserves that. So I spent time looking after her because she had breast cancer. Then that moved that she thought got cleared. Then it got the skeleton cancer, so that was terminal. And because of the way she was, the NHS weren't going to put up with her. So I kind of stuck around because I thought she doesn't deserve these parasites getting hold of her. And it was shocking because at the end of it, when they went through her will, she'd taken equity release on her property for 90,000, but had nothing to show for it. So I don't know where that went. But what amazed me was over the 10 years that she did that equity release, the interest on that 90K was 80K.
Yeah.
And you think, so anyone who thinks it's a good idea, equity release, for Christ's sake, don't do it. I mean, she had a fair bit left at the end, but I don't know who got that 90. I mean, neither my brother I was interested in anyway with it, but there were people that were just, you used to think in our generation, or mine, I'm considerably older than you, the elderly were left alone. You respected the elders, whereas now they seem to be free reign. Go rip off any granny or whatever you can.
Yeah.
And there's a guy who, he discovered, I went into it. He'd actually his wife, he was claiming full disability for her. So he had a mobility card and everything else. He had the gall to then hire her out for my mother's, who her estate was paying his wife, who was supposedly fully disabled, to be her cleaner. And she wasn't cleaning it. It was just getting money from everywhere. And okay, I don't have a feeling particularly bad because we were never close, but I just looked after her for a few years while, she went through a terminal cancer, just so at least she had some dignity, because left to her own devices. I mean, I thought she was going down with dementia. So I got the GP out and he did a sort of test you can do, count to 20 backwards, and then, from 20 backwards, then name the month of the year backwards, whatever. She was bright to button. He said, no, it's not dementia. She's a narcissist with a personality disorder. And then he had to explain to her what one of those was. And then she smiled. He said, that's not a good thing. To be, so he had to explain, narcissist with a personality disorder, not a good thing. I said, the only thing I wish we'd have known that about 40 years ago would have explained a lot. But, sadly she died. And then, then I picked back up, and because because I was having to look after her, I didn't want to be engaged with anybody else. So you kind of isolate yourself a bit, to the point where I didn't sign anything. And I didn't even sign when I hit 55, your pension that goes up at 55. So because I hadn't done it in 5 years, I then claimed the pension. I then got a backdated 5-year lump sum for a pension. So you then thought, right, I can now start again and rebuild. And that's what I started doing. So trying to pick up jobs. I went into business with an ex-Parachute Regiment officer that didn't work out too well, and we got a bit of debt from that, which I'm not a big fan of his for. But, it's difficult now getting back in, because at the end of the day, when you apply for a job, most of the time you're filling in a 2-page DEI. So as a white, straight 63-year-old, you're not that employable because you don't tick any DEI boxes. And you think, as you fill in the forms, you think, okay, so I identify as a man, I'm heterosexual, I'm white, and I'm old. So that's kind of tick box out of most of those things. And you think, but what has any of that got to do with your ability to do the job?
Nothing.
No, but that's where it is. So, I'm working with Matt Helliott with Pilgrims Bandits, and of all that, what an organisation that is. I mean, he's brilliant, and Matt is just such a phenomenal guy. The way he runs it, and his heart is everywhere. I mean, he's going to burn himself out because he's doing so much. Now he's got to get other people come in and take the workload off, but because he's so passionate about it, he does want to do everything. So he's working hard. But then when you compare that to the likes of the Royal British Legion, who are just becoming a high street bank attitude, and SAFA, they've lost the sight because you've got professional, I suppose, what they call non-for-profit people who actually have never been either a veteran or blind or deaf or whatever. They just come in and rotate round and they head it up. I mean, Royal British Legion now, they're closing all the branches. So all the regiments, like the Rifles, have got that beacon. You've probably seen it on LinkedIn where they're training people up how to deal with guys who are going to sadly consider taking their own lives. Because you used to be able to walk into a branch of the Royal British Legion. They're now closing it. Central call centre. They're not wanting to employ veterans. And they're sitting on a health fund of 350 million.
Yeah.
And now health funds is not cash in the bank, but it's assets, everything else. But what is a charity doing sitting on that amount of money? And the benchmark would be Royal British Veterans Enterprises, which have built the bravest manufacturing plant, and they've also built Centenary Village. So what they're doing is employing veterans, and they've got supported housing for guys who've got disabilities, as well as they've got emergency housing for guys who are homeless. But they're not giving them money. They're creating jobs in this manufacturing place. They earn it. They then get access to this Centenary Village, and they've got a gym there. They've got a cafe and all sorts of stuff. So it's treating veterans with dignity and pride, as opposed to saying, here's a handout.
It's been said before, and it's not about giving handouts, it's about giving purpose.
Yeah.
And that's what his veterans don't want, sort of handouts or sympathy. They just want a purpose and a drive to succeed and something to get the teeth into, that's what it's all about.
Well, half the time it's an opportunity to do it, because now they're almost, so many of them almost get semi-written off. You think, well, actually give them an opportunity to work, like the bravest manufacturing. Now do it. They just, and one of the things I'm trying to put, I met Johnny Mercer try and put a program together, but when the guys are coming off, the streets, whatever, the one thing they could do with is the ability to have a good hot shave, shower, and actually get a tailor or at least some decent clothes, because they say you should always dress for the job you want. So if you're looking smart, it's like when you put your number 2s on service test, you do feel smarter. So let the guys be smart. So then they've got the confidence that when they go for an interview, they feel as if they've got a chance of holding their own. Because most of the guys, when they do get in a room for an interview, a lot of time they'll be successful. The hardest part is getting them into that room so they can sell themselves. And that's where with the applying online, it's all algorithms. Or I applied for one job, actually interested enough for the SAFA, and they said they had 4 really good questions, and they said each individual question will be marked by an independent team, and you'll get feedback. They forgot to take off the HR software logo that was AI. They weren't doing an individual. And then when they wrote back to me, because when they sent it back, they said, due to the volume of applicants, there wasn't the ability to give meaningful input, give meaningful feedback. So you got none. You just got, by the answer of each question, there wasn't the ability to give you any meaningful input, feedback. So you got none. Then it said, if you want to have more information, send this email. So I got written back by the head of event saying, Colin, it was just, if you just said there were more people better qualified for the job, then fine. But she said, oh no, but we did look through it all. I said, but you forgot to take the logo off the software. So you clearly didn't. And then she said, but I'm glad that, it was nice to see that all your answers, you didn't use AI, you genuinely thought about them, and they were obviously proper answers. I said, saying the same can't be said about you, because you use an AI software package to markup. So I'm surprised you pick it up. But you think, why lie? Why say you're going to do something and not do it? And if you're going to turn someone down, then just be honest. There were better people. There were people better qualified. We're all big enough and ugly enough to accept it. We just don't like being lied to.
Yeah, I know. I fully get where you're coming from with that. Just be honest. Give us honest feedback. You weren't the right person for the job, or you didn't meet the stat, or like you say, we had a lot better. You'd be like, right, fair enough, thank you, positive feedback. I can take that on board. I know. Don't try and feed me some bullshit narrative that's not true, and I figure out. So yeah. It's like I said, the way the world is now. And I was talking about this the other day with someone. I was just talking about how I feel for the future generations, because when I was young, you know, in my or before I joined the military, and even after the military, before like the brief gap I had before jumping onto this sort of close protection, it was only a few months. But
Yeah.
I could go to an agency on a Friday, and by Monday I'd have a job on a building site, labouring,
Yeah.
just moving bricks. It wasn't amazing, but I had a job.
Yeah.
And now for every single kind of job that, you know, there's probably 300, 400, 500 applicants for one of those
Yeah.
jobs, or it's just, yeah.
Yeah. And
It's,
some of them are even notional jobs anyway. And that's the thing. And with AI coming in, I'm not sure is that necessarily is it a good thing, because I'm not a fan of using it. I know you can use it quickly, but if you're going to think about it and write it, why not? I'd rather. I mean, actually, with the book coming out, Milos joked. He said, "Who did you get to ghostwrite it?" I mean, thanks a bunch, Milos. So because he's written, I don't know if you've seen his book. He's written his crikey, what's his Trusted Mole. But he's joking about when I put mine out, because I suppose in the regiment I wasn't renowned for my staff work or my intellectual capacity. Although the best person I ever met for that was a guy called Malcolm Clucas. He's one power as well, but he used to read and follow the words using his finger. Now, so his nickname was either Clunk or One Cell. But he was a really bright bloke. The reason why he did it, Bob Llewellyn never asked him to do any exercise instructions or anything. So his way of getting out and doing any staff work.
who's the smartest?
Yeah, but he ended up he ended up finishing as chief instructor down at Yeovilton as flying helicopters. So he was awfully bloody clever. He was also bloody clever at getting out of staff work.
Well, no, that's fair one. No bluff too tough.
No.
But what I'd like to cover before we kind of wrap up, Colin, is obviously your book. Tell us all about that and when it's out, and where can we find it, and what it basically gives us a brief synopsis, if you like, if that's the right word.
Well, basically, I mean, I don't know, I sent you the summary that John Johnson Shaw did, which actually, in a way, is a really good summary, because he looked at it saying, basically it was about the setting up the team, the challenges we had to put up with, the fact that when predominantly the Royal Tank Regiment and others were making it really hard, it was a personality thing about they just didn't like people from the Parachute Regiment. Maybe they didn't think we were couth enough or what, I don't know. But what was nice is that merit did eventually pay out, because Sean and Dean and it should have been Eric and Eric Sequoia and John Sowerby should have gone to the 92 games. They split the team up. And one of the colonel actually had the gall to say he'd rather have no medal than a Parachute Regiment team winning a medal. So he split the team up purely and simply out of petty stupidity and jealousy. And frankly, if Sean and Dean and Eric and John had gone to 92 games, I reckon they'd have probably done a lot better in 94, and they may well have done better than a bronze in 98. Not taking anything against them, but Sean at that time was that good a driver with that crew. They were starting third fastest in the world. But we had some great times. I mean, we had Alan Wells and Margot as our coaches for a couple of years, because the BBA sent us down one guy to coach us who we all knew being dropped from the team under suspicion, taking steroids or whatever. And unfortunately, Eric had a friend who was in Alan and Margot's one of their training teams. We knew that they lived in Guildford, so we tracked them down and persuaded them to come and be our coaches. And Margot was just a brilliant coach. I mean, she was, her line was like, "Don't expect me to motivate you. That's got to come from within, but I will teach you all the technique to get the best out of your potential. I'm not a magician, but I will get absolutely the best out of it." And they just flourished because, they had the speedball training. We were training in the evenings, after normal work. Sunday mornings in the summer was the Virginia Waters Hill Sprint. And every time you were throwing up because you were, I mean, when they first gave us the training session, one of them was 4 sets of 250 meters with 6 minutes in between. We thought, well, that's nothing. We can do 10 milers. But it isn't if you're doing maximum at 250 meters flat out with every bit of energy. And we actually destroyed it. And Margot, the first time she turned up, there's John Goring, Rob Hinton, a couple of the other guys all standing around. John, you come across John Goring, he's quite a big bloke. He was 3 power and everything else, full friends. Margot walks up and they're talking about, I think, interior design or doing some DIY in the house. And Margot walked up and said, "Are you two talking about boxing? Are you two talking about bobsleigh? No. Are you talking about sprinting? No. Then I don't suggest you talk." And that was it. And then she stand over you when you're doing there's one session we did twice a week with something it must be somewhere in the region of 500 sit-ups, press-ups, all in one session. And she'd be standing over you saying, for every press-up and sit-up you don't do properly, your competition will, and for that reason they'll beat you now. Get back down and do them properly. There was no hold bars, but by Christ, in one season they took Sean's crew with John, Sowerby, Eric, and Dean from being probably fastest in the army. Well, no, because Tout was around. So being average in the army to being top 3 in the world because of just phenomenal training, and they were brilliant. And then that's when they really took off. And my crew was, we worked with, because we loaded up the fastest crew with the fastest driver. So we were still on world circuit, but Sean clearly was, packed to make sure he delivered. So it's talk about that, the challenges, and also the benefit of going back to operations in Ireland and everything else, back to bobsleigh, and some of the characters that got behind it in the regiment, one or two that perhaps didn't. But the balance between that excitement of doing your operational tours, doing your exercises, doing parachuting, and still doing the bobsleighing, and not being a prima donna. Because the one thing I don't think certainly while I was running it, we didn't have any prima donnas, because everyone, we regarded it, the bobsleigh, the same as if you're on a 4-man patrol. So we didn't emphasize the driver. The BBA unfortunately did, and that's why I think Sean perhaps slightly went off the rails and didn't deliver as well as he could have done, because the BBA would be telling him he's wonderful. And as a young 23-year-old, if a general's telling you you're wonderful, best of all, you may kind of believe it after a while.
Whereas when a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, when you had people like Rob Hinton and other people around him, if he started getting a bit silly, they quite happily took the piss and put him back in his box. But it's great. And the fact that there's now still going on, I didn't realise just how, I left in my last year was 94, 95. Then it kind of, Sean went on and won the bronze with Dean in 98. Then it kind of dipped off, and then Spud Smith picked it up again. And then he drove it, and you got a lunatic South African, Ivan Londale, who's running it. And he's great fun. And then you've got the likes of JB, John Brown, and Nick, are now running it, driving it through now. And the fact that they're 7 out of the 8, a parachute regiment in the Army team. They've won the Army Championship, God knows how many years running, 5 years. They're going to make up the bulk of the inter-services this year. In fact, it starts this week, actually, in Lillehammer. But it's great that it's still going on. And I think that the regiment does still hold it in high regard for the right reason. It's a good outlet for the blokes.
Yeah,
and they do rotate quite a few guys, get the experience. It's a bit like on your bucket list, John Parachute had to go at bobsleigh and carry on from there. But it's a good leveler as well. So it comes out in April. You can pre-order it now, either Waterstones and Amazon. It's hardback, and it'll be out. They literally, this last proofs got signed off a couple of days ago, so they're going to print it in March, and it's out on sale in April.
Well, fantastic stuff. What I will do, Colin, is when this podcast comes out, the links will be in the bio for all the viewers and followers that are watching. Go to the link, go get yourself a copy of the book. I'm going to get one myself. I'm going to give it a good read because the story sounds fascinating. But Colin, been an absolute pleasure. I will have a chat with you in a second off air when I stop the recording. But thank you very much for taking the time to come on. It was a bit of a fastball. I think we only had a chat this morning. And I was like, well, I've got a bit of availability this afternoon. And you were like, yeah. And then it's been all go. But I'm glad we sat down and did this.
Yeah.
Because it's I've got a lot of time for veterans, obviously Parachute Regiment, and veterans in general.
Yeah.
And I am all for promoting kind of veterans run organizations, businesses, personal projects, all that kind of stuff. But again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. Cheers. Thanks. Take care, Chris. Thanks.
Take care, buddy.